The safety harness felt tight against Rebecca Sinclair's chest as she stared out the small window of the airplane. Her husband's life insurance policy, discovered just yesterday, weighed heavier on her mind than the parachute strapped to her back. $1 million. Her signature forged. And now, 30,000 feet above the ground, she wondered if she would become just another tragic accident statistic. Rebecca had always trusted Daniel completely. Until now, how could the man who had vowed to love her forever be planning her death with such meticulous precision? 6 months ago, they had stood before their closest family and friends, exchanging vows beneath a canopy of white roses and promises. Daniel had looked at her with such adoration in his eyes that day, his voice breaking slightly as he promised to cherish her until his last breath. Rebecca had believed him with every fiber of her being. The way his green eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at her still made her heart skip a beat, even after 3 years together. Their wedding day had been the culmination of a love story that everyone envied. College sweethearts who had grown together, supported each other through tough times, and built a foundation of unwavering trust. The first few months of marriage had been everything Rebecca had dreamed of, and more. They spent weekends fixing up their first home together, a charming fixer-upper with good bones and endless potential. Daniel would surprise her with coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, the scent of freshly baked croissants wafting through their bedroom. They talked about their future, careers, travel plans, and eventually, children. 2, they had decided. Maybe 3 if they were feeling ambitious. Rebecca had never felt more secure, more loved, more certain of her place in the world. Then something changed. The shift was so sudden, so dramatic, that it felt like waking up next to a stranger. 2 weeks of cold silence and distant stares. Daniel came home late, avoided her touch, and spent hours locked in his home office. When she asked what was wrong, he brushed her off with terse responses. Nothing, just work. But Rebecca knew it was more than that. The light in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a haunted expression she couldn't decipher. "I think he's having an affair," Rebecca confided to her mother during a tearful phone call, her voice barely above a whisper as she stood in their backyard, making sure Daniel couldn't overhear. "He won't look at me, Mom. He barely speaks to me. Something is terribly wrong." Her mother had sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "Marriage isn't always easy, sweetheart. Sometimes people need space to figure things out. Have you tried talking to him?" "I've tried everything," Rebecca replied, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "He's completely shut me out. I don't know what to do." Those 2 weeks had been the longest of Rebecca's life. She scrutinized every text message on his phone when he wasn't looking, searching for evidence of another woman. She checked his credit card statements for unexplained hotel charges or gifts she hadn't received. She even followed him one evening when he said he was working late, only to find him sitting alone in his car in an empty parking lot, his head resting against the steering wheel. When she confronted him, he claimed he had just needed a moment of quiet to think. But what was he thinking about that he couldn't share with her? Just when Rebecca had convinced herself that their marriage was over before it had really begun, Daniel transformed again. The coldness vanished overnight, replaced by an almost desperate affection. Suddenly, he was planning elaborate date nights and surprising her with weekend getaways. He brought home bouquets of her favorite lilies for no reason at all. He held her a little too tightly each night, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. For 2 months, Daniel became the most attentive, loving husband any woman could ask for. He booked them a luxury cruise to the Bahamas, splurging on a suite with a private balcony overlooking the ocean. He took her to exclusive restaurants where reservations were nearly impossible to get. He bought her the diamond earrings she had admired months ago but had insisted were too extravagant. When she asked about the sudden change, about the money they were spending, he brushed off her concerns. "Life is short, Rebecca," he had said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I want to give you everything while I can." The comment had struck her as odd at the time, but she was so relieved to have her husband back that she didn't dwell on it. Perhaps he had simply had a moment of clarity, realized what was important in life. Or maybe he was compensating for whatever had caused his distant behavior before. Whatever the reason, Rebecca was grateful for the return of the man she had fallen in love with, until yesterday, until she found the life insurance policy while organizing their home office. $1 million to be paid to her in the event of Daniel's death, or so she had initially thought. But as she read the fine print, her blood ran cold. It wasn't Daniel's life that was insured. It was hers. And the policy had been taken out just 3 weeks ago, during their period of renewed bliss. Her signature was at the bottom of the document, but Rebecca had no memory of ever signing it. The forgery was good, impressive even, but it wasn't hers. That same evening, Daniel had come home with a bottle of champagne and an envelope containing 2 vouchers for a skydiving experience. "I've always wanted to try it," he had said, his eyes shining with excitement. "And I couldn't think of anyone I'd rather jump with than you." The timing couldn't have been coincidental. The life insurance policy, the extreme sport, the past 2 months of creating perfect memories together, as if he were checking items off a list before. Before what? Before she was gone? The thought made her physically ill. She had excused herself to the bathroom, where she vomited until there was nothing left but bitter bile and terrible suspicion. Now, as the small plane reached jumping altitude, Rebecca's suspicions had solidified into something more concrete. Daniel sat across from her, smiling encouragingly as the instructor, Jason Cortez, went through the final safety briefing. How could the man she loved be planning to kill her? What had happened to change him so dramatically? The questions swirled in her mind, making her dizzy with fear and confusion. "You'll be jumping in tandem with me," Jason was saying to Rebecca, his voice raised to be heard over the roar of the engines. "Daniel will be with Eddie here." He gestured to another instructor who was checking the equipment one last time. Rebecca nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. Daniel reached across and squeezed her hand. "It's going to be amazing, babe. The feeling of free fall, there's nothing like it." His touch sent a chill through her body. Those hands that had held her so tenderly, that had wiped away her tears and traced the contours of her face in the dark, were they the same hands that had forged her signature on a death benefit policy? Were they the same hands that had potentially tampered with her parachute? The thought struck her with such force that she gasped audibly. Jason looked at her with concern. "Everything okay?" "It's normal to be nervous, but I promise you're in good hands." Rebecca swallowed hard, forcing herself to maintain composure. "Actually, would you mind checking my parachute one more time? I just want to be sure." Daniel's expression flickered momentarily. Was it annoyance? Concern? Fear? "They've already checked everything, Rebecca. These guys are professionals." "It's no problem at all," Jason said, moving to inspect her equipment again. Better safe than sorry. Rebecca watched as Jason methodically examined her harness, straps, and the parachute pack itself. Everything seemed to be in order. She felt a brief moment of relief, followed immediately by shame. How could she suspect Daniel of such a terrible thing? Maybe she was losing her mind. Maybe— "Hey, Eddie," Jason called to his colleague. "Can you come take a look at this?" The second instructor moved over, and the 2 men huddled around Daniel's equipment, speaking in low tones that Rebecca couldn't hear over the plane's engines. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding her gaze. Finally, Jason straightened up and turned to them both, his expression serious. "I'm afraid we have a problem with your equipment, sir," he said to Daniel. "We're going to have to abort your jump today." "What?" Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "What's wrong with it?" "There appears to be an issue with the primary chute's packing," Jason explained, choosing his words carefully. "It's not something we can safely address mid-flight. We'll need to return to base and have it repacked properly." Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. Not her parachute, Daniel's. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't her life he was trying to end. It was his own. The plane began its descent back to the airfield, the mood inside the cabin tense and silent. Rebecca stared at her husband, seeing him clearly for the first time in months. The dark circles under his eyes that she had attributed to work stress. The weight loss that he had claimed was due to a new gym routine. The way he sometimes stared into space, as if seeing something terrible that only he could perceive. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Nothing. Just bad luck with the equipment. We can reschedule." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." Rebecca reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "The life insurance policy I found yesterday. It's in my name, but I never signed it. And now your parachute just happens to have a problem? Tell me the truth, please." The plane touched down with a slight bump, rolling to a stop near the hangar. The instructors began removing their equipment, giving the couple as much privacy as possible in the confined space. Daniel's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I never wanted you to find out," he said, his voice barely audible. "You weren't supposed to know until after." "After what, Daniel?" Rebecca's voice rose with desperation. "After you killed yourself and left me a widow? Is that what these past 2 months have been about? Creating final memories before you?" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Daniel finally looked up at her, his green eyes swimming with tears. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I'm so sorry for everything." As they exited the plane, Rebecca felt numb with shock. The bright sunshine seemed at odds with the darkness that had descended over her life. Jason approached them cautiously. "Mrs. Sinclair, I need to speak with you privately for a moment," he said, his expression grave. "About your husband's equipment." Rebecca nodded, following him a short distance away. Daniel remained by the plane, looking lost and broken. "I don't know what's going on between you two," Jason said quietly, "but that parachute didn't just happen to have a problem. Someone tampered with it. The pins were deliberately misaligned in a way that would have caused catastrophic failure during deployment. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it." Rebecca closed her eyes, the confirmation of her worst fears washing over her. "Thank you for telling me. I should report this to the police," Jason continued. "This wasn't an accident or negligence. Someone tried to—" "Please," Rebecca interrupted, opening her eyes to look at him pleadingly. "Give me 24 hours. I need to understand what's happening before—" She trailed off, not sure what she was asking for exactly. Time to confront her husband? Time to process the fact that the man she loved had apparently tried to kill himself? Jason hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. 24 hours. But if I don't hear from you by this time tomorrow, I'm calling the authorities." As Rebecca walked back to Daniel, her mind raced with questions and fears. The loving husband who had swept her off her feet, the distant stranger who had shut her out, the desperate man who had tried to create perfect memories before his death. Which version was the real Daniel Sinclair? And what could possibly have driven him to such extremes? The drive home was silent, the tension between them palpable. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, occasionally glancing at Daniel in the passenger seat. He stared out the window, his profile etched with a sadness so profound it took her breath away. When they finally reached their home, Rebecca couldn't bear the silence any longer. She turned off the engine and turned to face her husband. "Talk to me," she demanded, her voice breaking. "Whatever it is, we can face it together. But you have to tell me the truth, Daniel. All of it." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in months. And in his eyes, Rebecca saw something that made her heart sink with dread. Not anger, not deceit, but pure, unadulterated fear. "The truth," he echoed hollowly. "The truth is that I'm dying, Rebecca, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it." Rebecca stared at her husband, her mind struggling to process his words. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, her vision narrowing to just Daniel's face. The face she had memorized every inch of, the face she had planned to grow old with. "What do you mean you're dying?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sick? Why wouldn't you tell me?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she knew well. He looked exhausted, as if the weight of carrying this secret had physically crushed him. "Let's go inside," he said softly. "I'll tell you everything." Their living room, once a source of pride with its carefully chosen furniture and photographs documenting their life together, now felt like a stage set, artificially perfect, concealing the cracks beneath. Rebecca sat on the edge of the sofa, unable to relax, while Daniel paced in front of her. "2 months ago, I went in for my annual physical," he began, his voice flat and clinical, as if speaking about someone else entirely. "I mentioned some headaches I'd been having, some dizzy spells. Nothing major, I thought, just stress from the new position at work." Rebecca remembered those headaches, how Daniel would sometimes pause mid-sentence, pinching the bridge of his nose, eyes squeezed shut. She had suggested he see a doctor, but he'd brushed off her concerns. Dr. Freeman ordered some tests as a precaution. MRI, blood work, the usual. Daniel stopped pacing and sat heavily in the armchair across from her. The results? They found something rare, something they'd only seen a handful of times before. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What did they find?" Daniel's eyes met hers, and the pain she saw there made her flinch. "A rare neurological condition. There have only been 9 documented cases worldwide. 6 of those people died within months of diagnosis. The other 3?" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "The other 3?" Rebecca prompted, leaning forward. 2 agreed to experimental treatments. 1, me, was just diagnosed." He let out a bitter laugh. "Dr. Freeman didn't sugarcoat it. He said the disease progresses rapidly, that I should prepare." Rebecca felt as if she were drowning, struggling to pull air into her lungs. "But there must be treatments, clinical trials, something." "There's nothing definitive," Daniel interrupted. "The 2 patients who opted for experimental treatments are essentially guinea pigs, with minimal hope for success. That's what the doctors told me." So, those 2 weeks when you were distant," Rebecca said slowly, the pieces finally falling into place. Daniel nodded, looking down at his hands. "I'd just received the diagnosis. I didn't know how to tell you. We'd only been married for 4 months, Rebecca. How could I tell my new wife that I was going to die before our first anniversary?" Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, spilling over and tracking down her cheeks. "You should have told me immediately," she whispered. "I'm your wife, for better or worse, remember? Those weren't just words to me." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "but I couldn't bear to see the look that's on your face right now. I couldn't stand the thought of spending my last months watching you grieve for me while I was still alive. I wanted—" He stopped, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. "You wanted what?" Rebecca asked, even though she was beginning to understand. "I wanted to give you perfect memories," he admitted. "I wanted your last images of me to be happy ones, not hospital rooms and medications and pain. And then I thought, what if I could take care of you even after I was gone?" "The life insurance," Rebecca whispered. Daniel nodded. "I know it was wrong to forge your signature, but the policy had to be in your name, with me as the beneficiary for the first year. Insurance companies won't issue high-value policies for people with terminal diagnoses. The plan was to wait the required 13 months, then transfer the beneficiary status to you. But I knew I wouldn't have 13 months. The realization of what he had been planning hit Rebecca with the force of a physical blow. "So you were going to make it look like an accident," she said, her voice hollow. "The skydiving, the faulty parachute." "Yes," Daniel admitted, unable to meet her eyes. "An accident would bypass the suicide exclusion clause. You would get the money, enough to pay off the house, to give you time to grieve without worrying about finances." He looked up at her, his expression pleading. "I thought I was doing the right thing, Rebecca. I thought I was protecting you." Rebecca stood abruptly, emotion surging through her like a tidal wave. Protecting me? By lying to me? By leaving me to wonder for the rest of my life if I could have done something to save you? Her voice rose with each question. Did you ever stop to think what finding out the truth later would do to me? That I might spend years blaming myself for not seeing the signs? Daniel flinched at her words, but didn't try to defend himself. I wasn't thinking clearly, he admitted. The diagnosis, it changes everything. Your whole perspective shifts. Suddenly, all that matters is the time you have left and what you leave behind. Rebecca paced the room, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold the pieces of her shattered world together. The anger that had sustained her momentarily began to drain away, replaced by a profound sadness that seemed to seep into her very bones. How long? She asked, stopping to look at him. How long do the doctors think you have? Daniel hesitated, as if saying the words aloud would make them more real. 6 months, maybe less. The disease progresses differently in each case. But, he trailed off, the implication clear. 6 months. Half a year. It wasn't enough time. Not nearly enough to fulfill all the dreams they had shared, the life they had planned together. Rebecca felt a scream building inside her chest, but she swallowed it down. Breaking apart now wouldn't help either of them. Instead, she crossed the room and knelt in front of Daniel, taking his hands in hers. His fingers were cold, and she rubbed them gently between her palms. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady despite the tears still flowing freely down her face. "We are going to fight this. Together. No more secrets. No more plans made in isolation. Whatever time we have left, whether it's 6 months or 60 years, we face it as partners. Do you understand me?" Daniel looked at her with a mixture of awe and despair. "You don't know what you're signing up for, Rebecca. The deterioration will be difficult to witness. I don't want to burden you with—" "Stop," she interrupted firmly. "Marriage isn't about walking away when things get hard. It's about carrying each other through the impossible. And that's exactly what we're going to do." For the first time since she had discovered the life insurance policy, Rebecca saw a flicker of something other than despair in Daniel's eyes, a tiny spark of hope, fragile but present. "Okay," he whispered, squeezing her hands. Together. That night, they lay awake in bed, holding each other as if afraid the other might disappear. Rebecca's head rested on Daniel's chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat both a comfort and a reminder of its finite nature. They talked until dawn, about fears, regrets, and the practical matters that needed addressing. Daniel showed her his medical files, explained the symptoms he had been experiencing, and outlined the conversations he'd had with his doctors. The next morning, exhausted but resolute, Rebecca called Dr. Freeman's office. "I'm Daniel Sinclair's wife," she told the receptionist. "I need to speak with the doctor as soon as possible." To her surprise, she was put through almost immediately. "Mrs. Sinclair," Dr. Freeman's voice was warm with sympathy. "I've been hoping to hear from you. Has Daniel finally told you about his condition?" "Yes," Rebecca replied, glancing at Daniel who sat beside her, their hands intertwined. "And I'd like to know everything. All the options, all the research, everything you have on this disease." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Of course. Why don't you both come in this afternoon? There are some things we should discuss in person." 4 hours later, they sat in Dr. Freeman's office, surrounded by medical journals, test results, and brain scans that Rebecca struggled to make sense of. Dr. Freeman, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, explained the disease with clinical precision while still conveying genuine compassion. "The condition affects the central nervous system," he explained, pointing to several areas on Daniel's brain scan. "These regions show abnormal activity patterns that will eventually lead to progressive deterioration of both cognitive and motor functions." Rebecca studied the images, trying to reconcile the abstract blotches of color with the very real man sitting beside her. "And there's really no established treatment protocol? Nothing at all?" Dr. Freeman sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. As Daniel may have told you, this is an exceptionally rare condition. Research is limited by the small number of cases. The two patients currently undergoing experimental treatment are essentially pioneers, but their prognoses remain guarded at best. "I want to know about those treatments," Daniel said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "I know you said the chances were minimal, but things have changed now." He glanced at Rebecca, a silent communication passing between them. Dr. Freeman looked surprised, but nodded. "I can put you in touch with the research team. They're based at Johns Hopkins. The protocol involves a combination of targeted immunotherapy and neurological stimulation techniques. It's highly experimental, with significant risks. Risks don't matter much when the alternative is certainty," Daniel said quietly. Rebecca squeezed his hand, pride welling in her chest at his newfound resolve. "What about clinical trials? Research studies? There must be something. Somewhere." "There are a few avenues we haven't fully explored," Dr. Freeman admitted. "Let me make some calls, see if I can get you fast-tracked for a consultation with the specialists." As they prepared to leave, Rebecca had one more question. "Dr. Freeman, is this condition, is it hereditary? I mean, if we were to have children someday, would they be at risk?" Daniel looked at her sharply, clearly surprised by the question. They hadn't discussed children since his diagnosis. It had seemed like a dream that no longer applied to their shortened timeline. Dr. Freeman considered the question carefully. "We don't know for certain, given the rarity of the condition. I can order genetic testing to give you a clearer picture, but that would take time." Rebecca nodded, absorbing this information. "Please, order the tests. We need to know." On the drive home, Daniel was unusually quiet. Finally, as they pulled into their driveway, he turned to Rebecca. "Children? You're thinking about children at a time like this?" Rebecca put the car in park and turned to face him. "I'm thinking about everything, Daniel. About what we might lose, yes, but also about what we might still have." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want your child, even if you're not here to raise them with me. I want that part of you to continue." Daniel closed his eyes, overwhelmed by emotion. "Rebecca, I can't ask you to raise a child alone. And what if they inherit this condition? I couldn't bear to think of passing this on to an innocent life. That's why we're doing the genetic testing," she reminded him gently. "And as for raising a child alone, I wouldn't be alone. I'd have your child with me, a living reminder of our love." Daniel shook his head, but Rebecca could see the conflict in his eyes. "Let's focus on the treatment options first," he said finally. "One impossible challenge at a time." The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of medical appointments, research, and difficult conversations. They met with specialists, filled out paperwork for clinical trials, and began the process of genetic testing. Daniel started a journal, documenting his symptoms and thoughts for both medical purposes and as a keepsake for Rebecca. Together, they created a living will of sorts, not just legal directives, but letters, videos, and mementos that Daniel wanted to leave behind. Through it all, Rebecca remained the pillar of strength she had promised to be, saving her tears for private moments when Daniel was asleep. But each night, as she watched him breathing beside her, the reality of their situation would crash over her anew. She began to understand the desperation that had driven him to consider such drastic measures. The thought of losing him was unbearable, yet somehow she would have to bear it. 2 weeks after their conversation with Dr. Freeman, they were in the kitchen preparing dinner together, a new ritual they had established to make the most of their ordinary moments, when Daniel's phone rang. He answered, his face serious, as he listened to the person on the other end. "Yes, I understand. Tomorrow at 9? We'll be there." He hung up, turning to Rebecca with an unreadable expression. "That was Dr. Freeman's office. He wants to see us first thing tomorrow morning. He says it's urgent." Rebecca felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Urgent could only mean one thing. The disease was progressing faster than expected. She forced a smile she didn't feel. Then we'll be there at 9. Whatever it is, we face it together. Remember?" Daniel nodded, but his eyes were distant, already preparing for the worst. Rebecca turned back to the vegetables she had been chopping, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She had promised to be strong, to fight alongside him no matter what. But in that moment, faced with the possibility that their already precious time might be cut even shorter, she wondered if she had the strength to keep that promise. That night, neither of them slept. They lay in bed, holding each other, whispering about the past, college memories, their first date, the proposal, their wedding day, as if trying to stockpile happiness against the darkness that loomed on the horizon. As dawn broke, casting soft pink light through their bedroom window, Rebecca made a silent vow. Whatever news awaited them at Dr. Freeman's office, she would not waste a single moment of the time they had left in fear or regret. "I love you," she whispered against Daniel's chest, feeling his arms tighten around her in response. "No matter what happens today or tomorrow or the day after, that will never change." "I love you too," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible. Remember that, Rebecca. Always remember that." As they dressed and prepared to leave for the appointment, Rebecca caught Daniel staring at her from across the bedroom, his expression intense. "What?" she asked, self-consciously smoothing her hair. "I'm memorizing you," he said simply. "Every detail, every expression, just in case." The words broke something inside her, but Rebecca swallowed her grief and crossed the room to kiss him deeply. "No, just in case," she murmured against his lips. "We're not saying goodbye yet, not today." Whether she believed those words or was simply willing them to be true, Rebecca couldn't say. But as they drove to Dr. Freeman's office, their hands clasped tightly between them, she held on to hope with all her might. It was all they had left. The waiting room at Dr. Freeman's office felt unnaturally quiet that morning. Rebecca flipped mechanically through a magazine, not registering any of the words or images. Beside her, Daniel sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the abstract painting hanging on the opposite wall. The clock on the wall seemed to tick with exaggerated slowness, each second stretching painfully. "Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair?" The receptionist's voice startled them both. "Dr. Freeman will see you now." They followed her down the hallway, Rebecca's hand finding Daniel's almost instinctively. His palm was clammy against hers, betraying the anxiety he was trying so hard to conceal. Outside the doctor's office, Daniel paused, taking a deep breath. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "remember that these past few years with you have been the best of my life." Rebecca's throat tightened. "Don't talk like that, like this is the end. I'm just saying—" "I know what you're saying," she interrupted, placing her hand against his cheek, "but I'm not ready to hear it yet." Dr. Freeman greeted them with an unusual intensity, his typically calm demeanor replaced by a barely contained energy. He ushered them into seats across from his desk, remaining standing himself. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice," he began, his voice carefully measured. "I received some information yesterday evening that I felt couldn't wait." Rebecca braced herself, gripping Daniel's hand so tightly she feared she might be hurting him. This was it, the moment when their already shortened timeline would be cut even further. She had prepared herself as best she could, but the reality of hearing it aloud would be something else entirely. "I've been in contact with the research team at Johns Hopkins," Dr. Freeman continued, finally taking his seat. "As you know, they've been working with the other 2 patients diagnosed with your condition, Daniel." Daniel nodded stiffly. "You mentioned they were undergoing experimental treatments, with limited chances of success." "Yes, that's correct." Dr. Freeman shuffled some papers on his desk, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "One of those patients has been in the program for nearly 11 months now." The room fell silent for a moment, the unspoken question hanging in the air. 11 months was longer than anyone with the condition had survived after diagnosis. "And?" Daniel finally prompted, his voice hoarse. Dr. Freeman looked up then, and to Rebecca's shock, She saw that his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. And yesterday, they completed a comprehensive neural scan. He paused, drawing a deep breath. The results show complete remission of all abnormal brain activity patterns. The words hung in the air, their meaning not immediately registering. Rebecca stared at the doctor, uncomprehending. "Remission?" Daniel repeated carefully, as if afraid of misunderstanding. "What exactly does that mean in this context?" "It means," Dr. Freeman said, a smile breaking across his face, "that the experimental treatment appears to have halted the disease progression entirely. More than that, it seems to have reversed the neurological damage that had already occurred." Rebecca felt the room tilt slightly, her vision tunneling as the implications crashed over her. Are you saying there's a cure?" "I wouldn't go that far yet," Dr. Freeman cautioned, though his tone remained hopeful. "One case doesn't constitute definitive proof, but it's the most promising development we've seen with this condition. Ever." Daniel sat perfectly still, his expression blank with shock. "The other patient," he said slowly, "the one who's been in treatment for 11 months, what are they like now? Symptoms? Quality of life?" "Asymptomatic," Dr. Freeman replied. "Returning to normal daily activities. Cognitive functions restored to baseline. They're being monitored closely, of course, but all indicators suggest a complete recovery." A strangled sound escaped Daniel's throat, half laugh, half sob. Rebecca turned to him, tears streaming freely down her face now. She hadn't allowed herself to hope. Not really. She had prepared for loss, for grief, for a future without him. She had never prepared for this. "I want to be very clear," Dr. Freeman continued, his voice taking on a more measured tone. "This doesn't guarantee the same outcome for you, Daniel. Each case is unique, and the treatment protocol is intensive, with significant side effects. But," he leaned forward, his expression earnest, "this gives us something we didn't have before, a fighting chance." "When can we start?" Daniel asked immediately. "The treatment." "How soon?" "That's the other reason I called you in today," Dr. Freeman said. "I've already spoken with the team at Johns Hopkins. Given the urgency of your situation, they're prepared to admit you to the program immediately, as soon as tomorrow, if you're willing." Rebecca's mind raced, trying to process the practical implications. Johns Hopkins was several states away. They would need to arrange for time off work, temporary housing, finances. "We'll make it work," she said firmly, as if reading her own thoughts. "Whatever it takes." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd entered the office. His eyes were alight with something she hadn't seen in months. Genuine hope. "There's one more thing," Dr. Freeman added, retrieving another folder from his desk. "I expedited your genetic testing, Daniel. Given this new development, I thought it might be relevant to your decisions moving forward." Rebecca felt her breath catch. In the whirlwind of appointments and research, she had almost forgotten about the genetic testing, the question of whether any future children might inherit Daniel's condition. Dr. Freeman opened the folder, scanning the contents briefly before looking up. "The results are conclusive. Your condition does not appear to have a hereditary component. There's no genetic marker that would put offspring at increased risk." Decent. A second wave of emotion crashed over Rebecca. Different from the first, but no less powerful. Not hereditary. Their children, the children she had feared they might never have, would not be at risk. "So we could," she began, unable to finish the sentence, "start a family without that particular concern." "Yes," Dr. Freeman confirmed gently, "though I would still recommend waiting until we see how Daniel responds to treatment." Daniel reached for Rebecca's hand, interlacing their fingers. The simple gesture conveyed everything words couldn't: gratitude, relief, renewed hope for their shared future. The rest of the appointment passed in a blur of practical details. The treatment protocol would require Daniel to relocate to Baltimore for at least 6 months, possibly longer. There would be daily treatments, regular scans, and a regimen of medications with potentially severe side effects. The financial cost was substantial, though their insurance would cover a significant portion. "It won't be easy," Dr. Freeman warned as they prepared to leave. "This treatment is aggressive by necessity. There will be days when it feels worse than the disease itself. But at the end of it," Daniel said, his voice steady for the first time in months, "there's a chance for a real future. That's worth any temporary suffering." As they walked to the car, the morning sunlight seemed brighter somehow, the air fresher. Rebecca felt almost dizzy with the sudden shift in their reality, from preparing for inevitable loss to planning for possible survival. "Can't believe it," she whispered, leaning against the car door. "After everything, a chance." Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair, "for giving up, for not fighting sooner." "You were scared," she said, understanding in her voice. "We both were, but that's over now. From here on, we only look forward." The next 24 hours passed in a frenzy of activity. They booked flights to Baltimore, arranged for Rebecca to work remotely for the foreseeable future, and packed essentials for an extended stay. Daniel contacted his employer, explaining the situation and requesting medical leave. Rebecca called her parents, sharing the news through tears of cautious optimism. That evening, as they sat surrounded by half-packed suitcases, the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. The treatment would be grueling. Daily sessions of targeted immunotherapy, experimental neural stimulation, and a cocktail of medications with potentially debilitating side effects. "It won't always be like today," Rebecca said softly, folding a sweater and placing it carefully in the suitcase. "There will be hard days ahead, days when you might regret this decision." Daniel nodded, his expression solemn. "I know, but I also know I won't be facing them alone." He reached across the bed, taking her hand. "That makes all the difference." They arrived in Baltimore the following afternoon, checking into a small furnished apartment they had rented near the hospital. It was nothing like their home, sterile and impersonal, with generic artwork on the walls and a view of the hospital parking lot. But it would serve its purpose. The next morning, Daniel was admitted to the treatment program. The intake process was exhaustive. Blood tests, neural scans, cognitive assessments, and consultations with a team of specialists. Rebecca remained by his side throughout, taking notes and asking questions, determined to understand every aspect of the battle they were about to fight. The lead neurologist, Dr. Chen, was direct but compassionate as she outlined the road ahead. "The first phase of treatment is often the most difficult," she explained, reviewing Daniel's preliminary test results. "The side effects can be severe: extreme fatigue, nausea, cognitive disruption, potential seizures. We'll monitor you closely, adjust as needed." "And the chances of success?" Daniel asked, his voice steady despite the daunting list of potential complications. Dr. Chen considered him thoughtfully. "Based on our experience with previous patients and your current condition, I would estimate a 60 to 70% chance of significant improvement. Complete remission, like our recent case, perhaps 30 to 40%. But those odds are considerably better than what you were facing before. 30 to 40%. Rebecca turned the numbers over in her mind. Not a guarantee, not even a probability, but a real chance. One worth fighting for with everything they had. The first treatment session was scheduled for the following morning. That night, in their temporary apartment, Rebecca and Daniel lay in bed, talking softly about everything and nothing. Despite the uncertainty that still loomed ahead, there was a newfound peace between them. The peace that comes from facing the worst together and finding a path forward. "I need you to promise me something," Daniel said, his voice serious in the darkness. Rebecca propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the blinds. "What is it? If this doesn't work, if the treatment fails, or if the side effects become too much, I need you to let me go." He held up a hand as she began to protest. "I don't mean that I'll try anything like before. I just mean I need to know you'll be okay with whatever decision I make about continuing treatment." Rebecca wanted to argue, to insist that giving up wasn't an option, but she understood what he was really asking for: autonomy, dignity, and the right to face whatever came on his own terms. "I promise," she said finally, "to support whatever decisions you make. But I also promise to fight alongside you every step of the way, for as long as you're willing to fight." Daniel pulled her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. "That's all I needed to hear." Teat. The following weeks tested that promise in ways Rebecca couldn't have imagined. The treatment regimen was brutal, just as Dr. Chen had warned. Daniel endured daily immunotherapy infusions that left him violently ill, neural stimulation sessions that triggered debilitating migraines, and medications that caused everything from tremors to temporary memory lapses. There were days when he couldn't get out of bed, days when he didn't recognize her, days when he begged through tears for the pain to stop. Through it all, Rebecca remained steadfast, administering medications, tracking symptoms, advocating with doctors, and simply being present when nothing else could be done. 6 weeks into treatment, during a particularly difficult period, Daniel reached his breaking point. "I can't do this anymore," he sobbed, curled on the bathroom floor after hours of vomiting. "It's too much, Rebecca. The cure is worse than the disease." Rebecca sat beside him on the cold tile, gently stroking his back. "You can stop," she said softly. "If that's what you really want, we can stop today. I promised I would support your decision." He looked up at her, his face gaunt and pale, eyes sunken with exhaustion. "But you want me to continue." "What I want," she said carefully, "is for you to have the best chance at a full life, but not at the cost of your dignity or your autonomy. That has to be your choice, Daniel, not mine." He was quiet for a long moment, the only sound in the room their synchronized breathing. "One more week," he finally said. "I'll try for one more week, and then we'll reassess." That week proved to be the turning point. Whether by coincidence or because they had finally found the right combination of treatments, Daniel's side effects began to subside. Gradually, he regained strength, clarity, and a tentative optimism. 3 months into treatment, Dr. Chen ordered a comprehensive neural assessment, the first major evaluation of whether the protocol was working. Rebecca and Daniel sat in the consultation room, hands clasped tightly, as they waited for the results. Dr. Chen entered with a file folder and a cautious smile. "The scans show a significant reduction in abnormal brain activity," she announced without preamble. "Not complete remission yet, but unquestionable improvement. The treatment is working, Daniel." Relief flooded through Rebecca so intensely that for a moment she couldn't speak. Daniel squeezed her hand, his own emotions evident in the trembling of his fingers. "How significant?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Are we talking marginal improvement or a 40% reduction in overall abnormal activity?" Dr. Chen replied, turning the file so they could see the comparative scans. "That's better than we typically see at this stage of treatment. If you continue to respond at this rate, we have every reason to be optimistic." That night, they celebrated with takeout food from their favorite local restaurant and a bottle of sparkling cider. Alcohol was strictly prohibited during treatment. It was a simple celebration, but infused with a joy that neither had dared to feel for months. "I kept a journal," Daniel said unexpectedly, as they sat on the small balcony of their apartment, watching the city lights. "After my diagnosis, before I told you, I wrote letters to you that I never planned to send." Rebecca looked at him curiously. "What kind of letters?" "Everything I was afraid I wouldn't get to tell you in person. Memories, apologies, advice for your future without me." He stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid. "I thought about burning them after we started treatment, but I kept them. As a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Of how close I came to giving up everything." He looked up at her, his eyes intense in the dim light. "Of how much I almost lost by trying to face this alone." Rebecca reached across the small table, taking his hand. "You're not alone anymore. You never will be again." Seats. As the treatment continued, Daniel's improvement became more noticeable. The headaches that had plagued him since before diagnosis grew less frequent, then disappeared entirely. His energy levels increased, his cognitive functions sharpened, and the subtle tremor in his right hand, one of the first physical symptoms of his condition, faded away. 5 months into treatment, Dr. Chen ordered another comprehensive evaluation. This time, when she entered the consultation room, her smile was unrestrained. "The results are even better than we hoped," she announced, her professional demeanor giving way to genuine excitement. "Abnormal brain activity has been reduced by 85%. At this point, you're showing better results than our previous success case was at a similar stage." Daniel sat in stunned silence, unable to fully process what he was hearing. Rebecca voiced the question that both were thinking. "Does this mean, is he going to recover completely?" Dr. Chen's expression grew more measured. "I never promise certainties in medicine, especially with a condition this rare, but based on these results, I believe Daniel has an excellent chance at full remission. We need to complete the treatment protocol, of course, and you'll require regular monitoring for years to come, but—" She paused, allowing herself another smile. "Yes, I believe he will recover." The words hung in the air, almost too precious to acknowledge. After months of fighting, of suffering, of clinging to the smallest shreds of hope, here was validation that it hadn't been in vain. That evening, as they walked through a nearby park, the spring air soft around them, Daniel suddenly stopped in the middle of the path. "Marry me," he said, taking both of Rebecca's hands in his. She laughed, confused. "We're already married, remember? For better or worse, in sickness and in health." "I know," he said, his expression earnest, "but I want to marry you again. When this is all over, when I'm well, I want to stand in front of our friends and family and make those vows one more time, knowing exactly what they mean, what they've already asked of us, and how completely you've honored them." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes, but they were tears of joy, so different from the tears of grief and fear that had dominated the past months. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you again, as many times as you want." Daniel pulled her close, his arms strong around her in a way they hadn't been since before his diagnosis. "I have one more thing to ask," he murmured against her hair. "Anything," she replied without hesitation. He drew back slightly, meeting her gaze with solemn intensity. "When we finish treatment, when the doctors give the final all clear, I want us to try for a baby. The family we always talked about." Rebecca's heart swelled almost painfully in her chest. After everything they had endured, after preparing herself for widowhood before she'd even had time to fully experience being a wife, the thought of creating a family with Daniel seemed almost too beautiful to bear. "Are you sure?" she asked, needing to hear the confirmation. "More sure than I've ever been of anything," he replied, his voice steady and clear. "I want a lifetime with you, Rebecca. I want to grow old with you. I want to raise children with you. I want everything we dreamed of before, and so much more, because now I know exactly how precious it all is." As they stood there in the gathering twilight, arms wrapped around each other, Rebecca felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. The road ahead would still have its challenges, the remainder of Daniel's treatment, the careful monitoring that would follow, the cautious rebuilding of the life that had been put on hold. But for the first time since that terrible day in Dr. Freeman's office, she allowed herself to believe in their future, without reservation. A future that, against all odds, they would share together. The final month of Daniel's treatment passed with agonizing slowness. Each day brought them closer to the life they had put on hold, yet the uncertainty lingered like a shadow. Though the doctors remained optimistic, both Rebecca and Daniel had learned the hard way that nothing was guaranteed, that hope, while necessary, was not the same as certainty. Rebecca threw herself into preparations for their return home, coordinating with Daniel's employer about his gradual reintegration to work. ensuring their house was ready after months of minimal upkeep, and researching post-treatment care options. Keeping busy helped manage the anxiety that still gnawed at her during quiet moments, the fear that somehow this miraculous turn of events might still be snatched away. "You're doing it again," Daniel observed one evening as they sat in their temporary apartment, Rebecca's laptop open to yet another medical research article. She looked up, startled. "Doing what?" "Planning for every possible worst-case scenario." He closed her laptop gently. "We've spent months living in fear, Rebecca. Maybe it's time we practice living in hope instead." Rebecca sighed, leaning back against the couch. "I know. It's just hard to let go of the fear completely." "After everything." Daniel took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "Tell me something you're looking forward to. Something that has nothing to do with treatments, or doctors, or recovery." She thought for a moment, allowing herself to imagine a future unclouded by illness. "I want to go camping again, like we did that weekend before our wedding. Just the two of us by the lake, watching the stars, talking until dawn." A smile spread across Daniel's face. "The night you insisted there was a bear outside our tent, but it turned out to be a raccoon raiding our cooler? I still maintain it was an unusually large raccoon." Rebecca laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "What about you? What are you looking forward to?" Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Sunday mornings, making pancakes together, reading the paper, planning the week ahead, the ordinary moments we used to take for granted." The simplicity of his answer brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. After facing the prospect of losing everything, it was the everyday rhythms of life together that they both craved most. The quiet intimacy of shared routines that formed the backbone of a marriage. On their final day in Baltimore, Dr. Chen conducted one last comprehensive evaluation. Rebecca sat beside Daniel as he underwent the now familiar series of cognitive tests, blood draws, and neural scans. They had been down this road many times over the past 6 months, but today felt different. A culmination rather than just another checkpoint. When Dr. Chen finally entered the consultation room with Daniel's results, her expression gave nothing away. She sat across from them, arranging her notes methodically before looking up. "As you know," she began, her voice measured and professional, "we've been tracking multiple markers of disease activity throughout your treatment. Neural activity patterns, inflammatory responses, cognitive function assessments." She paused, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. "Based on all available metrics, I can now officially state that you have achieved complete remission." The words hung in the air for a moment, too monumental to immediately absorb. Rebecca felt Daniel's hand tighten around hers, his intake of breath sharp and sudden. "Complete remission," he repeated carefully. "You're certain?" Dr. Chen allowed herself a rare smile. "As certain as medical science allows us to be. Your brain scans show no abnormal activity. Your cognitive function tests are normal. Better than normal, actually. All inflammatory markers are within standard ranges." She leaned forward slightly. "In simple terms, Daniel, your body shows no signs of the disease that brought you here 6 months ago." Rebecca pressed a hand to her mouth, unable to contain the sob that escaped her. After everything, the devastating diagnosis, the near-suicide attempt, the grueling treatment, this moment felt almost unreal in its perfection. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Is there maintenance treatment? Follow-up care?" "We'll want to monitor you regularly," Dr. Chen explained. "Monthly check-ins for the first year, then quarterly in year 2, annually after that. There's no established protocol for long-term follow-up with this condition, given its rarity and the novelty of successful treatment, but we'll err on the side of caution." She handed them each a folder containing discharge instructions, medication schedules, and contact information. "You should know," she added, her tone softening, "that you're making medical history, Daniel. Your case, along with our other success story, will change how this condition is viewed and treated moving forward." What was once considered a death sentence is now potentially manageable, even curable. Daniel nodded, clearly moved by the implications. The other patient, the one who went into remission before me, are they still doing well? Thriving, Dr. Chen confirmed. Returned to work, resumed normal activities, no signs of relapse. We have every reason to believe your outcome will be similarly positive. As they prepared to leave the hospital for the final time, Rebecca found herself lingering in the hallway, overcome by a wave of conflicting emotions. This place had been the setting for both their deepest despair and their most profound hope, a backdrop to the most challenging chapter of their marriage. "It's strange," she said softly, as Daniel joined her. "Part of me never wants to see this place again, but another part feels like we're leaving something important behind." Daniel slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Not behind," he corrected gently. "We're carrying it forward. Everything we learned here, everything we became." The flight home the next day felt like crossing a threshold. As the plane ascended above Baltimore, Rebecca watched the hospital, barely visible among the cityscape below, recede from view. Beside her, Daniel dozed peacefully, his face relaxed in a way it hadn't been in months. The dark circles that had become a permanent fixture beneath his eyes had faded. Color had returned to his cheeks, and he had regained most of the weight lost during treatment. Looking at him now, no one would guess the battle he had fought, the proximity to death he had experienced, both from disease and from his own desperate plan. That knowledge was theirs alone, a private history etched into the foundation of their marriage. Their house, when they finally returned to it, felt both familiar and strange, like a beloved childhood home revisited after years away. Rebecca moved through the rooms slowly, reacquainting herself with the space that had once been the center of their world. Everything was exactly as they had left it 6 months ago, yet everything had changed. In the home office, the same room where she had discovered the life insurance policy that had set their ordeal in motion, Rebecca found herself pausing, struck by how differently she viewed the space now. What had once been a place of devastating discovery had become simply a room again. 4 walls, a desk, bookshelves. The power of that terrible moment had been neutralized by all that had followed. Daniel found her there, standing in the doorway, lost in thought. "We could redecorate," he suggested, correctly reading her expression. "Make it different. A fresh start." Rebecca considered this, then shook her head. "No, I don't think so. This room is part of our story now. All of it, the good and the bad, has brought us here." That evening, they ordered takeout from their favorite local restaurant and ate at their dining table for the first time in half a year. The normalcy of the ritual felt luxurious after months of hospital cafeteria food and meals hurriedly consumed between appointments. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as they finished dinner, twirling his wine glass thoughtfully. Wine was another small pleasure he had been denied during treatment, and he savored it now with newfound appreciation. "About what?" Rebecca prompted, when he didn't immediately continue. "About what I said in Baltimore. About renewing our vows." Rebecca smiled, recalling the moment in the park. "Our second wedding, you mean?" "Yes, but I'm thinking maybe we should wait a bit. Give ourselves time to settle back into normal life before planning a celebration." He reached across the table for her hand. "And, to be honest, I'm not sure I want to share you with anyone else just yet. These next few months, I want them to be just for us." Rebecca understood completely. After so much time spent in medical facilities, surrounded by doctors and technicians and other patients, the privacy of their home felt sacred. "Just for us," she agreed. "Though we should probably at least call our parents tomorrow, let them know we're home." They spent the following weeks rebuilding their life together, finding a new rhythm that incorporated the necessary medical follow-ups while allowing space for joy and normalcy to return. Daniel eased back into work part-time. Rebecca resumed her regular schedule, and gradually, the medical crisis that had dominated their existence began to recede into memory. 1 month after their return, Daniel had his first follow-up appointment with Dr. Freeman. Rebecca accompanied him, both of them experiencing a strange sense of déjà vu as they entered the waiting room where their journey had begun. "It feels like years ago," Daniel murmured as they waited to be called in. "That first appointment, when he told me about the diagnosis." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "In some ways, it was a lifetime ago." Dr. Freeman greeted them with genuine warmth, his joy at Daniel's recovery evident in every gesture. "You look like a new man," he observed, conducting a thorough examination. "The treatment protocol clearly agrees with you." "It wasn't exactly a vacation," Daniel replied wryly, "but the results were worth every difficult moment." The examination confirmed what they already knew. Daniel was in complete remission, his body showing no signs of the disease that had nearly claimed his life. As Dr. Freeman made notes in his chart, he paused, looking up at them with a thoughtful expression. "I've been practicing medicine for 25 years, he said, setting down his pen. "In that time, I've had to deliver more bad news than I care to remember. It's rare that I get to witness a turnaround like this, a genuine medical miracle." He smiled, the gesture crinkling the corners of his eyes. "It reminds me why I became a doctor in the first place." As they left the appointment, walking hand in hand through the hospital parking lot, Rebecca felt a sense of closure that had been missing until now. This building, these grounds, they no longer represented the beginning of an ending, but rather the starting point of their second chance. 2 months after their return home, on a crisp Saturday morning, Rebecca woke to find Daniel's side of the bed empty. She found him in the kitchen, surrounded by grocery bags and cooking supplies, a streak of flour across his cheek. "What's all this?" she asked, gesturing to the chaos. Daniel turned to her with a slightly sheepish smile. "I wanted to surprise you with breakfast, but it turns out my pancake flipping skills are a bit rusty." Rebecca laughed, moving to his side to assess the damage. A stack of misshapen pancakes sat on a plate, some slightly burned, others undercooked in the middle. "They have character," she offered diplomatically. "They're terrible," Daniel corrected, with a self-deprecating chuckle. "But they're made with love, so there's that." As they sat together eating the imperfect pancakes, Rebecca was struck by the simple perfection of the moment. Exactly the kind of ordinary Sunday morning Daniel had said he was looking forward to during their time in Baltimore. The realization brought a lump to her throat. "What is it?" Daniel asked, noticing the shift in her expression. "Nothing," she assured him, blinking back unexpected tears. "Everything. Just grateful for pancakes, I guess." He understood, of course. After facing the prospect of a future without these small, shared moments, their value had become immeasurable. Later that morning, as Rebecca was sorting through the mail that had accumulated during their absence, she came across an envelope addressed to both of them. Inside was a formal invitation to a medical fundraiser hosted by Johns Hopkins, specifically for research into rare neurological conditions. "They want you to speak," she told Daniel, showing him the personal note attached to the invitation. "About your experience as a patient." Daniel read the note thoughtfully. "It's in 3 months. Do you think we should go?" Rebecca considered the question. Baltimore held complicated memories for them both, but the idea of contributing to research that might help others facing similar diagnoses had undeniable appeal. "I think it might be good," she said finally, "to close that chapter properly. And your story could give hope to other patients." The decision made, they marked the date on their calendar, a commitment to the future that once would have seemed impossible to make. As life settled into its new patterns, Rebecca found herself thinking increasingly about the other dream they had discussed, starting a family. The genetic testing had confirmed that Daniel's condition wasn't hereditary, removing one significant concern. His health was now stable, with each follow-up appointment confirming his continued remission. And at 29 and 30, they were at an ideal age to become parents. Still, she hesitated to bring up the subject, uncertain whether Daniel was ready to consider such a significant step forward. His body had been through tremendous stress during treatment, and though he had recovered remarkably well, she worried about adding the demands of parenthood too soon. Her concerns were put to rest one evening as they sat on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel had been quieter than usual all day, contemplative in a way that once would have alarmed her, but now simply indicated he was processing something important. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice soft in the gathering twilight, "about what we discussed in Baltimore, about trying for a baby." Rebecca's heart quickened. "What about it?" "I think I'm ready." He turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable. "If you still want that too." "I do," she replied without hesitation. "More than anything." Daniel reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I was afraid for a while," he admitted, even after remission was confirmed. "Afraid that the disease might return, that I might still leave you alone, leave our child without a father." "That's understandable," Rebecca said softly, "after everything." "But I realized something recently," he continued. "None of us know what the future holds. My diagnosis taught me that life can change in an instant. For the worse, yes, but also for the better." He smiled, squeezing her hand. "If we wait for absolute certainty, we'll be waiting forever. And I don't want to waste another day of the life we fought so hard to have together." As the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving the sky awash in deepening purple, they made the decision that would shape the next chapter of their journey. A decision born not of fear or desperation, but of hope and profound gratitude for the second chance they had been given. 2 weeks later, they boarded a plane to Baltimore for the medical fundraiser. The city looked different somehow, less intimidating, more like any other urban landscape. The hospital, when they arrived for the pre-event tour, no longer loomed as a monument to suffering, but stood simply as a place of healing, of science, of human endeavor against the forces of disease. The event itself was elegant but understated, gathering medical professionals, researchers, patients, and donors in a shared commitment to advancing treatment for rare conditions. When Daniel took the podium to share his story, Rebecca watched from the front row, her heart swelling with pride. "6 months ago, I sat in an office not far from here and was told I was dying," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Today, I stand before you in complete remission, with a future I never thought I'd have." He paused, his gaze finding Rebecca's in the audience. "But this isn't just a story about medical science, though the treatment I received was nothing short of miraculous. It's also a story about partnership, about facing the impossible together, and about finding hope in the darkest places." As Daniel continued, weaving their personal journey into a broader narrative about research, treatment, and the human capacity for resilience, Rebecca felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. Their ordeal, transformed through Daniel's words, became not just a private struggle, but a contribution to something larger, a testament to possibility that might bring comfort to others facing similar battles. After the event, as they prepared to return to their hotel, Dr. Chen approached them, her normally reserved demeanor softened by the occasion. "I wanted to let you know," she said, drawing them slightly aside from the crowd, "that our other success case, the patient who went into remission before you, is expecting a baby, their first." The news struck Rebecca with unexpected force, a tangible affirmation of the future they themselves were hoping for. "That's wonderful," she replied, emotion making her voice slightly unsteady. Dr. Chen nodded, her expression warm. "I thought you might find it encouraging. Life goes on, not just in survival, but in creation." She squeezed Daniel's arm briefly. "Your journey doesn't end with remission. In many ways, it's just beginning." That night, in their hotel room overlooking the Baltimore skyline, Rebecca stood by the window, reflecting on the doctor's words. Just beginning. After months of focusing solely on survival, the expanse of possibilities before them seemed almost overwhelming in its breadth. Daniel joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about what Dr. Chen said," Rebecca replied, leaning back against his chest. "About our journey just beginning. It's strange to think that if none of this had happened, the diagnosis, the treatment, everything we went through, we might never have understood how precious each day really is. A high price for wisdom," Daniel observed quietly. "Yes," Rebecca agreed, "but now that we have it, I don't want to waste it." Daniel turned her gently in his arms, cupping her face in his hands. "We won't," he promised, his voice low and certain. "Every day, every moment, it all matters now. In a way, it never did before." As they stood there, silhouetted against the city lights, Rebecca felt the final pieces of their ordeal settling into place. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but integrated into the fabric of who they had become, individually and together. The fear that had been their constant companion for so long had finally begun to recede, making space for something far more powerful, profound gratitude for the present and genuine hope for the future. A future that, against all odds, stretched before them, unmarked, unwritten, and full of possibilities. 2 years later, Rebecca stood in the doorway of their backyard, her heart overflowing as she watched Daniel chase their daughter across the grass. 18-month-old Lily squealed with delight as her father pretended to stumble, giving her a momentary lead before scooping her up in his arms and spinning her around. Her blonde curls caught the late afternoon sunlight, her laughter carrying across the yard like music. "Higher, Daddy! Higher!" Lily demanded, her small hands patting Daniel's cheeks for emphasis. "As high as the sky?" Daniel asked, his voice playfully serious, as he hoisted her up onto his shoulders. "Sky!" Lily agreed, pointing upward with absolute authority. Rebecca smiled, drinking in the scene with a gratitude that still took her breath away sometimes. Their daughter, conceived just weeks after the medical fundraiser in Baltimore, had her father's green eyes and her mother's determined spirit. She was the living embodiment of their second chance, a daily reminder of how close they had come to losing everything and how miraculous their journey had been. The past 2 years had unfolded with a sweetness that felt earned rather than granted. Daniel's remission had remained stable, each follow-up appointment confirming what they had begun to accept as their new reality, that he was truly well, that the shadow of illness had lifted permanently from their lives. He had returned to work full-time, eventually accepting a promotion that once would have seemed like an impossibility. Their second wedding, the vow renewal Daniel had proposed during his treatment, had taken place on their 3rd anniversary, a simple ceremony in their backyard with only their closest family and friends in attendance. Rebecca had worn a cream-colored sundress instead of a formal gown. Daniel, a light linen suit rather than a tuxedo. The informality had felt right somehow, an acknowledgement that what mattered wasn't the trappings, but the promises themselves. Promises they now understood, with a depth few couples ever achieved. "Until death do us part," Daniel had said, his voice steady as he held her hands beneath an arch of summer roses. Words I once thought would come too soon, that now stretch before us into a future I can hardly believe is ours. Rebecca had felt tears streaming down her face as she repeated her own vows, not the traditional ones they had exchanged at their first wedding, but new promises crafted from the crucible of their experience. "I vow to remember every day the gift of our time together, to never take for granted the ordinary moments that make a life, to face whatever comes with the same courage and honesty we've already found in each other." The pregnancy that followed had been uncomplicated but emotionally charged. Each milestone, the first ultrasound, the flutter of movement, the steady growth of her belly, had carried a significance that went beyond normal expectant parent joy. For them, Lily's development represented not just new life, but renewed life, a continuation they had once thought impossible. When she was born, pink and perfect, and screaming her displeasure at the bright hospital lights. Daniel had wept openly, cradling her against his chest with a reverence that humbled everyone in the delivery room. "Hello, little miracle," he had whispered against her downy head. "We've been waiting for you for such a long time." Now, watching them together in the golden light of late afternoon, Rebecca felt the familiar swell of emotion that still caught her unawares at moments like this. Not just love, though that was certainly part of it, but a complex mixture of gratitude, wonder, and lingering disbelief that this was truly their life now. "Mama, watch!" Lily called, breaking into Rebecca's thoughts as Daniel helped her fly with her arms outstretched. "I flying! I see you, sweetheart," Rebecca called back, waving. "You're the best little flyer in the whole world." Daniel caught her eye over Lily's head, his smile reflecting the same wonder she felt. This shared awareness of how precious their ordinary happiness was had become the foundation of their relationship, a secret language of glances and smiles that acknowledged without words how differently things might have turned out. The quarterly checkups with Dr. Freeman had become annual visits, each one bringing the same good news. No signs of recurrence, all tests normal, prognosis excellent. At their most recent appointment, Dr. Freeman had made it official. Daniel was considered cured, not just in remission. The distinction might have seemed semantic to some, but to them it represented a final release from the fear that had shadowed even their happiest moments. "I believe we can close this chapter definitively," Dr. Freeman had said, closing Daniel's medical file with a satisfying thump. "You'll still need annual checkups as a precaution, but medically speaking, this condition is behind you." They had celebrated that night with a quiet dinner at home after Lily was asleep, opening a bottle of champagne they had been saving for a special occasion. "To closing chapters," Daniel had toasted, raising his glass. "And to opening new ones," Rebecca had added, touching her glass to his. Later that evening, after they had put Lily to bed, they sat together on the porch swing that had become their favorite spot for quiet conversation. The rhythmic creaking of the chains, the gentle back-and-forth motion, these simple sensations had come to represent the peaceful center they had found after the storm. "I had a call from Dr. Chen today," Daniel said, his arm warm around Rebecca's shoulders. "The research team at Johns Hopkins is publishing a comprehensive paper on my case and the other successful patient. They believe they've identified the specific mechanism that made the treatment effective." Rebecca turned to look at him, understanding the significance immediately. "Which means they can refine the protocol for future patients." Daniel nodded, his expression reflective. "They estimate it could increase the success rate from 40% to as high as 75%. That's a lot of lives, Rebecca. A lot of families who won't have to go through what we did." The thought was humbling, that their personal struggle might contribute to sparing others the same pain. It gave purpose to what had once seemed like senseless suffering, weaving their individual story into a larger tapestry of human progress against disease. "You know what today is?" Rebecca asked, after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. Daniel considered for a moment, then understanding dawned in his eyes. 2 years since the skydiving trip? Yes. Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder, remembering the terror and confusion of that day, finding the insurance policy, suspecting the worst, discovering the truth. "Sometimes I still can't believe how close we came to losing each other, how differently it all could have ended." Daniel's arm tightened around her. "I think about that parachute sometimes," he admitted quietly, "about what would have happened if you hadn't asked the instructor to check it again." "I try not to think about that," Rebecca confessed. "It's too—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the visceral dread that still accompanied thoughts of that particular "what if." "I know." Daniel pressed a kiss to her temple. "But in a strange way, I'm grateful even for that darkest moment. It brought everything into focus, in a way nothing else could have." It forced us to confront what was happening instead of letting me slip away quietly. Rebecca understood what he meant. That terrible day had been the catalyst for everything that followed. The treatment, the remission, Lily. Without that crisis point, Daniel might never have told her about his diagnosis, might never have sought treatment, might have succeeded in his desperate plan to leave her with nothing but an insurance payout and unanswerable questions. "We never did go skydiving," she remarked, changing the subject slightly. "After all that drama." Daniel chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Are you suggesting we should? Because I have to say, I've lost my enthusiasm for the activity." "God, no," Rebecca laughed. "I think we've had enough adrenaline to last a lifetime. I'm perfectly happy with both feet on the ground. Thank you very much." They fell silent again, listening to the evening sounds, distant traffic, a neighbor's wind chimes, the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. These ordinary moments had become sacred to them both, precious in their very mundanity. "I've been thinking," Daniel said eventually, "about what's next for us." Rebecca smiled, recognizing the contemplative tone that usually preceded one of his more significant proposals. "Oh? And what might that be?" "Lily's going to be 2 before we know it," he began, his voice casual, but with an undercurrent of excitement. "Maybe it's time she had a sibling." Rebecca sat up straighter, turning to study his face in the fading light. "Are you serious? You want another baby?" Daniel nodded, his expression a mixture of hope and certainty. "I do. If you do, too. I want our family to grow. I want to experience it all again. The pregnancy, the birth, the sleepless nights and first smiles. Everything we almost missed out on." Emotion welled in Rebecca's throat, making it difficult to speak. After everything they had endured, Daniel's enthusiasm for the future, for expanding their family, for embracing more responsibility and chaos and joy, moved her deeply. "Yes," she whispered, taking his face between her hands. "Yes, I want that too." Later that night, after they had made love with the sweet familiarity of a couple who had faced death together and chosen life instead, Rebecca lay awake, Daniel's steady breathing beside her a comfort she never took for granted. Through the partially open curtains, moonlight spilled across their bed, illuminating the peaceful lines of his face in sleep. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from newlyweds full of untested promises to survivors who understood exactly what those vows meant, from a husband who had been willing to die alone rather than burden his wife with his illness, to partners who had learned that true love meant facing even the most terrible truths together, from a wife who had discovered a forged insurance policy and suspected murder to a woman who had fought alongside her husband for his very life. The insurance policy that had started it all had been canceled long ago, the paperwork shredded and disposed of like the relic of a darker time it was. They had other protections in place now, reasonable, transparent ones that they had chosen together with clear eyes and honest hearts. Morning came softly, sunlight replacing moonlight as Lily's babbling over the baby monitor signaled the start of another day. Daniel stirred beside her, reaching for her automatically even before his eyes opened. "Good morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "What time is it?" "Early," Rebecca replied, brushing his hair back from his forehead in a gesture that had become habitual. "But someone's awake and wants company." Daniel smiled, eyes still closed. "Your daughter has her mother's inability to sleep in." "Oh, she's my daughter when she wakes up early, is she?" Rebecca teased, poking him gently in the ribs. "Absolutely," he confirmed, finally opening his eyes to look at her with such love that even after years together, it still made her breath catch. "But I wouldn't have it any other way." They rose together, moving through the familiar morning routine with the synchronized rhythm of a couple who had learned to treasure the ordinary. Breakfast preparations, Lily's demands for nana, banana, and mook, milk. Coffee brewed just the way they each liked it. The mundane poetry of family life unfolding exactly as it should. As Rebecca cut Lily's banana into small, manageable pieces, she found herself suddenly overwhelmed by the perfection of this simple moment. 2 years ago, she had been preparing herself to become a widow. Today, she was a wife and mother, watching her healthy husband make silly faces at their daughter across the breakfast table. "What is it?" Daniel asked, noticing her pause, the knife suspended above the cutting board. "Nothing," she assured him, resuming her task. "Everything. Just happy." Daniel's expression softened with understanding. These moments of spontaneous gratitude still struck them both occasionally, brief, powerful reminders of the life they had nearly lost and miraculously regained. After breakfast, they decided to take advantage of the beautiful spring day with a trip to the local park. Lily, strapped into her stroller with important toddler supplies, a stuffed bunny, a sippy cup, and a bag of dry cereal, kicked her feet impatiently as they walked the 3 blocks to the playground. "Swing! Swing!" she chanted as the playground came into view, straining against the stroller straps in her excitement. "Yes, swings first," Daniel agreed, quickening his pace to match her enthusiasm. "Always swings first." At the playground, Rebecca sat on a bench watching as Daniel lifted Lily into a baby swing, her chubby legs dangling through the openings. Her delighted laughter as he pushed her gently, creating just enough momentum to satisfy without frightening, was the purest sound Rebecca had ever heard. A young woman sat down beside her, visibly pregnant and looking exhausted. She smiled apologetically as she lowered herself carefully onto the bench. "Sorry, my feet are killing me." 7 months, and already feeling like a whale. "First baby?" Rebecca asked kindly. The woman nodded, resting her hands on her rounded belly. "Is that yours?" she asked, gesturing toward Lily and Daniel. "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "Lily's 18 months now." "Your husband's great with her," the woman observed, watching as Daniel made a game of the swing, counting each push and pretending to be surprised when Lily demanded more. "He is," Rebecca agreed simply, though the words hardly captured the depth of Daniel's devotion to their daughter. A devotion made all the more profound by his awareness of how close he had come to never knowing her at all. "Were you scared?" the pregnant woman asked suddenly. "Before she was born, I mean. About becoming parents, changing your lives completely." Rebecca considered the question, remembering the complex emotions of her own pregnancy, not just the normal apprehension of first-time parents, but the lingering fear that despite all evidence to the contrary, something might still go wrong with Daniel's health, that she might end up raising their child alone after all. "Yes," she said honestly, "but not in the way you might think." She hesitated, unsure how much of their story to share with this stranger. "My husband was very ill before we had Lily. There was a time when we thought we might not have a future together at all, let alone children." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "But he recovered." "Yes," Rebecca said, watching as Daniel now helped Lily transition from the swing to the small slide, his hands steady and protective on her tiny back. "Completely. It was a miracle, really. The kind you don't expect to happen to you." "I'm so glad," the woman said with genuine warmth. "For all of you." Rebecca smiled, touched by the simple sincerity of the response. "The point is, we were scared, but for different reasons than most people. And what I learned from that time is that fear doesn't have to be the thing that defines your choices. Hope can be stronger if you let it." The woman nodded thoughtfully, her hand making slow circles on her belly. "I like that. Hope being stronger than fear." After the playground, they walked to a nearby cafe for lunch. Lily, tired from her morning of activity, dozed in her stroller, while Rebecca and Daniel lingered over coffee, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Work projects, garden plans for the summer, whether the kitchen needed repainting or just a good cleaning. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," Daniel said, stirring a second packet of sugar into his coffee. "I heard from Jason yesterday. Rebecca blinked, the name taking a moment to register. Jason Cortez? The skydiving instructor? Daniel nodded. He sent an email. Apparently, he's starting his own adventure tourism company and wanted to know if we'd be interested in trying again. He laughed at Rebecca's expression of horror. Don't worry, I politely declined, but he did say something interesting at the end of his message. What's that? Rebecca asked, relieved that a second skydiving attempt was not in their future. He said he thinks about us sometimes, about how a routine equipment check changed the course of so many lives. Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. It's strange to think that our entire world pivoted on such a small moment. You asking him to check the parachutes one more time. Rebecca reached across the table to take his hand. The familiar warmth of his skin against hers, a comfort she never tired of. Not so small. She disagreed gently. It was love that made me ask. Love and fear and hope all tangled together. Daniel squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting the same deep understanding that had carried them through their darkest hours. I used to think it was a cruel twist of fate, getting diagnosed so soon after our wedding, having our new life together cut short before it really began. And now? Rebecca prompted when he paused. Now, I think maybe it was a gift, he said slowly. Not the diagnosis itself, but what came after. The clarity it brought, the appreciation for every single day. He glanced at Lily, still sleeping peacefully in her stroller. The knowledge that none of this, not you, not her, not any of it, can ever be taken for granted. As they walked home in the warm afternoon sunshine, Lily awake now and pointing excitedly at dogs, birds, and anything else that caught her toddler attention, Rebecca felt a sense of completion that went beyond mere happiness. It was deeper than that, a bone-deep certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they had already survived the worst that life could throw at them, and emerged stronger for it. The insurance policy that had once signaled Daniel's desperation had become, in its own way, a different kind of insurance altogether. The assurance that they could face anything together, that no secret was too dark to share, no burden too heavy to carry as one. That evening, after Lily was bathed and read to and tucked into her crib with her beloved bunny, Rebecca found Daniel on the back porch again, staring up at the stars beginning to appear in the deepening twilight. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, echoing the phrase that had become their shorthand for checking in with each other's deeper emotions. Daniel smiled, opening his arm in invitation for her to join him. "I was just thinking about fate, or destiny, or whatever you want to call it," he said as she settled against his side. "How sometimes the worst moment of your life can lead to the best, if you just hold on long enough to see it through." Rebecca nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The discovery of the insurance policy, the terror of the skydiving incident, these had been the darkest points of their marriage. Yet without them, Daniel might never have received the treatment that saved his life. Without them, they might not be sitting here now, parents to Lily, planning for a second child, looking forward to decades together rather than counting their remaining months. "I was so angry when I found that policy," she admitted, remembering the sick feeling of betrayal that had washed over her that day. "I thought I'd married a stranger, someone capable of—" "I know," Daniel said softly when she couldn't finish the sentence, "and I was so lost in my own fear and grief that I couldn't see what I was doing to you, how my attempts to protect you were actually the cruelest thing I could have done." Rebecca turned her face up to his, studying the familiar features that had become more precious to her than she could express. "But we found our way through, together, he echoed, bending to kiss her gently, the way it was always meant to be. As night fell completely around them, the stars emerging in full brilliance above their small backyard, Rebecca felt the final pieces of their journey settling into perfect alignment. The fear that had once defined their days had been transformed into a deeper appreciation for each moment. The desperate plan that had nearly separated them forever had instead become the catalyst for their most profound connection. And the life insurance policy, discovered in a moment of heart-stopping suspicion, had led not to tragedy, but to their greatest treasure, time together, stretching before them like an endless gift, each day more precious for having almost been lost. In the quiet darkness of their backyard, with their daughter sleeping peacefully inside, and the promise of more children, more joy, more ordinary days, and extraordinary moments ahead, Rebecca finally understood the truth that had been forming in her heart these past 2 years. Sometimes, when we are brave enough to face our deepest fears, when we choose honesty over comfortable lies, when we reach out instead of pulling away, sometimes life rewards that courage with miracles we never dared to hope for. And sometimes, what begins as a deadly leap becomes instead the first step into a future more beautiful than we ever imagined possible. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.